Hello and welcome to another episode of the Federalist Files. We're going to be going over Federalist number 9 today. It is titled The Union as a Safeguard Against Domestic Faction and Insurrection. It is written by Alexander Hamilton, written on November 21st, 1787. The topics include, this is going to be actually the very introduction, the very beginning, the real, really broad introduction of the three branches of government in this paper here. Hamilton opens up with a strong statement, and I quote, "A firm union will be of the utmost moment to the peace and liberty of the states as a barrier against domestic faction and insurrection," end quote. So, as this has been really the subject of the last couple papers. You're going to need a union in order to quell domestic factions as well as insurrections. And he explains the history of other republics such as Greece and Italy, that they were in a continuous state of agitation and revolutions, and he characterizes it as, and I quote, "by which they were kept in a state of perpetual vibration between the extremes of tyranny and anarchy," end quote. Without a strong unified federal government, it's either going to be one of the two. It's going to be tyranny or anarchy, because you're going to have groups try to gain power that will cause the anarchy, because there will be no federal government structure to quell those insurrections, or it'll be tyranny because the federal government won't actually have the written power to do to quell insurrection. So instead, what they'll do is they will usurp that power, and they will just continue to display infractions of their, governing document. In this case, it would be the Constitution, but whatever governing document, they will continue to break all of those rules just to try to get a grip or grasp on the society, and that will cause tyranny. Next, he states, and I quote, "If momentary rays of glory break forth from the gloom while they dazzle us with a transient and fleeting brilliancy, they at the same time admonish us to lament that the vices of government should pervert the direction and tarnish the luster of those bright talents and exalted endowments for which the favored soils that produce them have been so justly celebrated," end quote. Here, it's a very, this is a really, really in-depth quote here, but here what he's alluding to is that all prosperity, that is, all the good that comes out of having a very, very free society, will end up sizzling out because there is an unstable government structure. No matter how effective, having that momentary freedom, as he says, the momentary rays of glory, he characterizes it as if you have that, which is fantastic, but if you have an unstable government, then none of it will matter. It'll eventually just sizzle its way out. And these are imperfections of Republican government that dissenters, and I guess it was the anti-Federalist, they must have written a paper right before this one, because Hamilton talks about some of the people they quoted. They quoted Montesquieu, who's a famous philosopher, as well throughout this one. And these are supposed to be the imperfections of Republican government, but it's because it's being mischaracterized the way, because our Republican government that Hamilton is looking to instill is completely different than the ones that they're explaining. And they're concerned, the dissenters are concerned with, and it's very weird because they're concerned with the current Constitution, but really they're advocates for despotism draw these same arguments about Republican forms of government and against civil liberties. So it's almost like what these people that are against the federal government are fighting for, and their arguments are the same that are used by monarchs and despots and people that are against civil liberties. And that's pretty much what Hamilton's alluding to. And then he characterizes them, and I quote, "They have decried all free government as inconsistent with the order of society and have indulged themselves in malicious exultation over its friends and partisans," end quote. So that's exactly what I was saying. They've decried that, free government is inconsistent with, the society. The society, no one has a free government, so why should we, pretty much? Oh, no one else has and there has been this history of other free governments that had issues, but really they weren't truly free governments. They were much more anarchist. They would be, quote unquote free, but then they wouldn't afford those same civil liberties to everybody, which really does not make them a free form of government. And they would be, because of that, they would be unstable. And they also would not be able to, like, if you have these freedoms that are afforded in the Constitution of the United States, if you have, let's just say, the Bill of Rights, if there's no government structure, having that written down, that Bill of Rights, is meaningless. It makes it a complete dead letter when there's no actual force behind it. And that's really what he is referencing. Now, he believes America will prove these dissenters wrong through the use of this proposed constitution. And his resolution to these issues that they're talking about, these insurrections and the instabilities, the three branches of government, he states, and I quote, "The regular distribution of power into distinct departments, the introduction of legislative balances and checks, the institution of courts composed of judges holding their offices during good behavior, the representation of the people in the legislature by deputies of their own election, these are wholly new discoveries or have made their principal progress towards perfection in modern times. They are means and powerful means by which the excellencies of republican government may be retained and its imperfections lessened or avoided," end quote. So this is something that's never been done before. That's really what he's referencing here. He's saying, we're going to have a legislature, we're going to have a court system to pretty much protect those laws that are written down, to try to give them some sort of a cogent or convincing, like, a power behind them, so they're not just words. Because you can have a governing document if you decide to just completely circumvent that or avoid that governing document, and there's no recourse or no repercussions or ramifications for doing so, then it pretty much means that it's completely useless. That it's a dead letter on arrival. So, like I said, the opposition of the proposed constitution, they invoked the philosopher Montesquieu, who's a famous philosopher, I think, from the Roman times. And Hamilton states, and I quote, "When Montesquieu recommends a small extent for republics, the standards he had in view were of dimensions far short of the limits of almost every one of these states," end quote. So here what he's saying is the anti-federalists were using Montesquieu, but they were also misconceiving a lot of the words that he said. They only were taking certain excerpts of his piece that they were quoting. And Hamilton continues with this, and I quote, "If we therefore take his ideas on this point as the criterion of truth, we shall be driven to the alternative either of taking refuge at once in the arms of a monarchy, or of splitting ourselves into an infinity of little, jealous, clashing, tumultuous commonwealths, the wretched nurseries of unceasing discord, and the miserable objects of universal pity or contempt," end quote. So here he's being a little witty with what he's saying. He's just saying, if we decide to take what these guys are saying, these anti-federalists, or we're taking what Montesquieu says in this very small excerpt, if we're taking this for fact, then there's only really two options at this point. We're going to have all these independent sovereignties that are just going to be fighting constantly with each other, and there's going to be discord, and it's going to be chaotic, or we're going to have a monarchy that takes away everyone's civil liberties and rights from them. And he continues now. Hamilton is going to continue. I got a lot of quotes here. He continues from that same piece that the anti-federalists quoted from Montesquieu, but it's a lot of other things that actually support Hamilton's point and what he's talking about. So they really only chose one thing to talk about with Montesquieu that supported their point, and then Hamilton goes on and explains in detail Montesquieu's exact philosophy of what he's talking about, and it does actually align with the proposed constitution. So he continues here to quote Montesquieu at length, and he quotes Montesquieu saying, and I quote, "It is very probable that mankind would have been obliged at length to live constantly under the government of a single person, had they not contrived a kind of constitution that has all the internal advantages of a republican, together with the external force of a monarchical government. I mean a confederate republic," end quote. So here he's saying a confederate republic. This is Montesquieu speaking, and that's kind of what what it is that that's going on now. Currently, it's a Confederate Republic, but then the way that Montesquieu characterizes is very interesting. I'm going to continue. And he states, and I quote, "This form of government is a convention by which several smaller states agree to become members of a larger one, which they intend to form. It is a kind of assemblage of societies that constitute a new one, capable of increasing by means of new associations, till they arrive to such a degree of power as to be able to provide for the security of the united body." End quote. So that there is what he's saying is it's going to be a bunch of sovereignties that get together in an assemblage of societies, rather. He's not saying anything about a unified government. He's not talking about one federal head yet, and he doesn't really talk about a federal head. There is like a supreme authority, kind of like what's going on with the current Articles of Confederation. There's that Congress. I think he calls them, he has a different name for them. He does not call them a Congress, but rather a, I'll get to it, I think a convention or something of that nature. But he does not exactly characterize it the way that Hamilton would. He says, hey, it's going to be a bunch of states. They're going to get together. They're going to kind of create one like larger unified one. But he doesn't say anything about any type of court system. He doesn't talk about. He kind of just makes it like it's the current system that's going on. And in doing so, having all of those united body will help in a degree of power as it's related to security of that united body. And he continues, Montesquieu, and I quote, "A republic of this kind, able to withstand an external force, may support itself without any internal corruptions. The form of this society prevents all manner of inconveniences. If a single member should attempt to usurp the supreme authority, he could not be supposed to have an equal authority and credit in all the Confederate States. Were he to have too great an influence over one, this would alarm the rest. Were he to subdue a part, that which would still remain free might oppose him with forces independent of those which he had usurped and overpower him before he could be settled in his usurpation." End quote. So what he's saying here is, with this set system, you're not going to have a person able to overthrow everybody, because all of these states that are unified in this pact are going to see, hey, look, this one guy thinks he's gaining power over everybody. We're going to have to shut him down. We're going to have to suppress him real quick. That's pretty much, we're going to have to subdue him. That's pretty much exactly what Hamilton's talking about with having that union to stop those usurpations by, let's say, there was like a governor in that Confederate state. Let's say it was the Confederate state of New York, and they just wanted to take over New Jersey and Pennsylvania. New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire. You'd have all these other states that would turn around and they would suppress that individual. Now, amongst these passages is that of the, and I quote, "form of government is a convention by which several smaller states agree to become members of a larger one," end quote. So that's the part that kind of differentiates the proposed constitution from what Montesquieu is talking about. And what Montesquieu is talking about is it's very similar to the current system that was in place, the Articles of Confederation. The issue with the Articles of Confederation was there was a couple. The problem was they could not bring in the money to actually raise the troops or pay off the debt or provide for any other services through the state governments or even through their version of the federal government. And like I said, there was not any court system, really. It was not a strong federal court system. The court system, I think, was just to the states. There really wasn't a set standard for a federal court system. And like I said before, there was no executive. It was just really a legislature, and it was just a Congress of men that really didn't... and having that much power in that set of men, and it was not a large amount of them. I remember, what did I say the vote was? It was like 41 to 38 or something in proposing the Constitution. So it was like a little bit less than 100 people held all the power at one time, which is not good. And you want to... when it comes to the legislature, you want to divide that power the best that you can. That's the reason we currently have 435 House of Representatives members, and we have 100 senators. And then, the executive. And in general, that's just 1/3 of our government power. You still have the other 2/3. So we're talking the entire whole was ran by like 80 people before. That's how it worked. And that's really the issue, because you're talking about 435 plus 100, that's 535, and that's just 1/3 of the government is ran like that. And then obviously you have the executive is just one person, but the executive is very limited in their power. And then the judicial branches, forget it. There's so many judges out there. Now, these talks of Montesquieu further corroborate the claims of Hamilton's call for a necessity of a federal government for stability and security, because the questions that he's raising, that Montesquieu is talking about, are the exact same points that Hamilton has been making throughout the papers. Hamilton and Jay and even Madison, they'll end up making more and more of these points over and over again. Hamilton speaks of a republic in which all states are united for the success of each other. An internal conflict between two states will be solved with the help from neighboring states. And that's exactly what Montesquieu just said in the very last quote that I had there. And he concludes this by citing Montesquieu once again for the very last time. And I quote, "As this government is composed of small republics, it enjoys the internal happiness of each, and with respect to its external situation, it is possessed by means of the association of all the advantages of large monarchies," end quote. So he's saying having these small republics united will have a internal happiness, because there won't be as much infighting, because they will each be checking on each other, and you will have that advantage of a large monarchy, because you're not going to see foreign invasions into the country. And Hamilton quotes him at length, and he explains why. He says, to illustrate the tendency of the Union to repress domestic faction and insurrection, end quote. So that's really the point in which he hammered it home with him over and over again, the repetitiousness of the text with Montesquieu. And that wasn't even everything he said. There was so much. It was about a full page, and I couldn't just keep quoting that over and over again, because then it kind of lacks originality. And Hamilton draws a distinction from other historic republics, because a federal system like the one proposed, each state will hold an equal proportion of the federal power and sovereign power, with the ability to have the same number of senators. So he does differentiate between what Montesquieu's talking about, because Montesquieu is just talking about a bunch of separate republics. Like I said, they're going to get together and they're going to kind of just have their little Congress, and that's it. And that is supposed to be the end all be all. But what Hamilton's saying is each one of these states are sovereign, but there is that national government that oversees everything. And he'll get to this in another, I think it's my next quote, he'll talk about this. That federal government oversees everything, but each state has equal power in terms of their pull in that government with their number of senators they're going to have, because senators have way more power than the House of Representatives do, because there's only 100 of them, and each state gets 2. So each state will have that equal amount of power in Senate power, which differentiates it from the Confederate Republic, which is just an assemblage of societies, like Montesquieu says earlier. Now, Hamilton continues stating, and I quote, "So long as the separate organization of the members be not abolished, so long as it exists by constitutional necessity for local purposes, though it should be in perfect subordination to the general authority of the Union, it would still be in fact and in theory an association of states or a confederacy. The proposed constitution, so far from implying an abolition of the state governments, makes them constituent parts of the national sovereignty by allowing them a direct representation in the Senate, and leaves in their possession certain exclusive and very important portions of sovereign power. This fully corresponds in every rational import of the terms with the idea of a federal government," end quote. So that might actually be the first time that Hamilton or any of the authors refers to the government proposed as a federal system, which is, he differentiates in, I think it's going to be an upcoming paper soon, but they differentiate between the difference between a federal and a national character is. Our government is a little bit of both. It's a little national, it's a little bit federal in some ways. National meaning the way in which we elect our representatives is considered national because we do use a democratic process, but then the way in which we do the electoral college is something that's much more of the federal character. And it sounds a little bit confusing. I'm not going to get really that deep into it or elaborate because we're going to wait till that paper gets there, because it does get rather confusing. The best way I'd be able to explain it is if you go to Great Britain currently under the current system that's going on now today, when they go to vote for things, it's very democratic. Like, you just go vote straight down the board. Everyone's vote has the same number when they go to vote for whoever their prime minister is going to be. I do not think they have a system like us with an electoral college approach. Whoever wins that state gets the electoral votes. So it's not like that, because if we didn't have the electoral college, then you might as well just throw away the representatives at that point, because that's the point in having the electoral college, because it does declare and it recognizes a lot of these smaller states that they have their sovereignty. Because then if it weren't for an electoral college, you have only the large states would really depict who the president's going to be. So you would see states like California, New York, they say, and I think Illinois is another one, and New Jersey would be like, highly densely populated states that vote heavy blue, would really just their votes alone would be needed to win the presidency. If you were watching on election night and you saw Trump was winning pretty substantially, pretty handily, and he was winning the popular vote as well, but then once they come out with California, then suddenly he's down by 2 million popular votes, but he was up before that by like 2 or 3 million popular votes. So that just goes to show the population density that, and it does make sense if you actually sit here and think about it. Should California, New York, and Illinois be able to make the policy nationwide for every other state in the country? Is that fair to the other states in the country? It really isn't. That's a nationally top-down ran government, really. Then there's really no point in even having states. You might as well just call them territories or call them provinces, because then generally it'll be such a top-down structure, it'll be such a centralized government that there's no point in even having the state government, really, or having any individual different mandates in the states. Like, for example, in each individual state, there's a right to bear arms federally, so individual states really can't mandate total gun confiscation. It won't be protected under the Second Amendment. So each state has their own rules. Like, it's part of the 10th Amendment is, those rights that are not bestowed by the federal government, or those powers that aren't given to the federal government, are given to the people and the states therein. It's something of that nature. So it means that anything that's not regulated by the federal government, the state government has the right to regulate that. So realistically, if you want to get rid of the electoral college, you might as well get rid of all state rights. You might as well just go with a top-down structure. It's just not in our character at all. If you want to get rid of the electoral college, you're going to need a vote. You're going to need an amendment to the Constitution, which is going to have to be three-quarters of state legislatures are going to have to agree, meaning it's kind of like an electoral college process. Like, you're going to have a majority in New Jersey. If a majority of the state legislature votes in favor of an amendment, then that only counts as one vote, and then you have to reach whatever 3/4 of 50 states is, which I think is something like 37 states. So you have to get that in the state legislatures. So you have to have 37 of them all in agreement. And then on top of that, you need 2/3 of both of the chambers of Congress to agree in order to make an amendment. So it's pretty difficult to amend the Constitution. There's a lot of safeguards on confiscating liberties, and that's the reason they do that, is so that your freedom's not really taken from you. That's the reason that was all written into the Constitution. So, whereas, these historical republics generally will only have a council or Congress, like I said before, that will make all the decisions without a check and balance, such as a judicial branch or a chief executive or, a president, as I use them interchangeably. This proposed plan would be different and unique from those other republics, like the proposed constitutional plan that Hamilton's been talking about this whole time. And he ends the paper by summarizing the Lycian Confederacy, stating of 23 cities or republics, the largest were entitled to 3 votes in common council. Those of the middle classes and like those of the middle size or structure, they were allowed 2 votes, and then the smallest one of this common council was only allowed 1 vote. So, and the common council, because that's what they called them. They called them the common council rather than the Congress. They had the appointment of all the judges and the magistrates in the respective cities, or you call them republics. And then Montesquieu characterized it as a confederacy, as this confederacy as an excellent model of Confederate republic. To which Hamilton responded, "That is completely erroneous. He has no idea what he's talking about." Which he's right, because if you're telling, like I just evaluated before, talking about New York and New Jersey and California. So you're going to let people that live in California dictate what the state court system is in Florida? Like, that's how it's going to work now? That's what we're going to do? So that's really, and he said, that's not even a Confederate Republic. That's not what it is in essence or in definition, because they don't have their own state sovereignty then at that point if you're going to let them. And we're not talking, these aren't federal judges. You're going to let them appoint, the republic judges or the state. Like, imagine if the state judges in Florida were picked by people that lived in New Jersey. And that's really what a direct democracy is that you will have people every single time. That's why direct democracy in general, especially over, and he'll get to this later, the authors will get to this later, but over a vast amount of land, especially at that time, it was very inadequate and it was impractical. Because how is it possible to get a vote on every single thing that happens? Because that's really what a direct democracy is there's a vote on every single little thing. And he knew this was impractical, because over a vast amount of land, how are you going to get people that at that time lived in Georgia to come vote in Pennsylvania every single time there's a need for a vote? That's the reason we had the representatives also, was because we only had to worry about them getting there. We didn't have to worry about, the masses to go vote or to get out to vote and do this or do that. And then also in having those representatives, this is something that's, and I think it's a good thing. I think that our rights will end up, if they ever get taken away, they won't actually be taken away by a government official. I think they'll be taken away by the people. I think the people will actually vote towards the end of it. They will want it. They will want their guns be taken away. They'll want some sort of legislation for hate speech, take away your First Amendment. I think the people I actually have less, as crazy as this sounds, I'm not a huge fan of politicians. I don't like politicians really, but I have less, because I think politicians actually are a little bit scared of the people when it comes to taking certain things away, certain rights, but I have a lot less confidence in the people at large. I think the people at large are going to be the ones to actually take their own rights away. I really do, because the way the system's written up is, the members of Congress are the ones that are supposed to, even if the people think, hey, I don't think that there should be guns anymore. I don't think anybody should have the right to own one individually. These Congress members are still supposed to stand for what the Constitution says. Same thing with the judges. Same thing with the Supreme Court justices. They're supposed to stand. At the end of the day, their oath is to the Constitution. At the end of the day, their constituents also do matter to them, but still, they're supposed to be of utmost pride. They're supposed to be of utmost loyalty to the Constitution and have the utmost integrity and not want to take those rights away from the citizens, even if the citizenry does want those rights taken away. They're supposed to abide by the Constitution. That's the reason they put their hand on the Constitution and they take an oath. That's really what the prime reason is for all of that. So that's it. That'll be it for this paper. Oh, you know what he actually states here? I missed one thing here. I think I did. No. So long as the separate organization of the members be not abolished, so long as it exists. No, I'm good. I am good. Okay. So that's going to be it for this paper. It is Friday. I will be coming out with another one on Monday. I don't know. Maybe I'll make one over the weekend here come out on Saturday or Sunday. I'm not really sure yet. I do appreciate anybody that tunes in and listens. If you have any concerns, any questions, any ideas for another video, just email it to me. I have my email in description. It's the thefederalistfiles@gmail.com. And if you want to follow me on any of my platforms, I have some of my information down there as well. Please like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you drop the mic on anybody you know. Drop the mic. And that'll be it. I will see everyone on Monday. Everyone have a good weekend.